remember the goal for muscle health is to get the bolus amount of amino acids in the bloodstream at once. Anything below that, you're just getting calories. And yeah, the amino acids do other things. You know, they help with vasodilation and they do all that stuff, but the body cares about maintaining muscle tissue and just tissue turnover. The best thing you can do for any of these things is to have an optimal body composition. Keep inflammation low, stay strong. High quality muscle mass is, you know, directly related to your survivability. The lower your skeletal muscle mass, the higher your morbidity and mortality.
I've got a lot of female listeners that, you know, might be hearing what you're saying, and the way that might be interpreted is to get, you know, more bulky, more muscular.
It's impossible. How long have you been training?
My whole life.
Exactly. How easy.
And look at me. You know?
No. But I mean, how easy. The most that, you know, really, and this is what I was talking to Dr. Don Layman about this, and the most we've ever seen someone put on muscle without any kind of anabolic agents is you're looking at 2 pounds a month with an untrained individual. The more trained you are, you know how hard it is to put on skeletal muscle?
It's hard.
It is impossible. Have you ever met a girl say, you know, I just am not going to, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to get bulky. I'm going to really train hard, but I'm afraid I'm going to get bulky. In the history of I've never seen that. I've seen thousands of patients. No one has ever said, well, I'm getting too bulky.
I think you have like these fit influencers on Instagram now that, you know, many females who probably are taking other kinds of substances. Right. And so, but that's not how your average female is going to look once they start resistance training.
No, you're going to look better. You're going to have tighter skin. You're going to likely be smaller. You're going to have better body composition. You're going to improve your inflammatory markers. You're going to improve your glucose control because you have more skeletal muscle. Muscle is your metabolic currency. It is the largest site for glucose disposal. You know, when you think about your resting metabolic rate, muscle is it. Muscle is incredibly underappreciated. And especially as you transition to perimenopause, menopause, the more muscle you can put on in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, the better you're going to be because it becomes more difficult.
Isn't bone mineral density something that many women struggle with?
Totally.
How does that relate to muscle mass and protein consumption?
And we actually looked at this a lot at WashU. The higher the protein intake, the better the bone density.
Wow.
Because bone is made of protein.
Isn't there like what's one of the misconceptions that's often waged against high protein diets that it can...
Bad for the kidneys, number one, which actually that has been massively disproven. There's multiple meta-analysis, so a group of really high-quality papers that have come out. It actually improves kidney function. It improves glomerular filtration rate.
Are these in people with healthy kidneys?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you know of any kidney pathological, kidney indications that would, maybe preempt somebody from adopting a high-protein diet or?
I'm definitely not a nephrologist, so I would ask those guys. But if you are healthy, they've never seen an individual consume too much protein.
What I found, there's actually a dearth of nephrologists that specialize in nutrition as well.
Amazing.
If anybody listening to this knows a nephrologist who specializes in nutrition, please hit me up because that's an area that I'd love to explore further.
When you think about kidneys, you think about diabetes because there's, the individuals that really go on dialysis are oftentimes diabetics with now kidney issues. Mm-hmm. It's a glucose problem.
And then so bone mineral density.
Yeah, that is another huge myth. Everybody thinks that the more protein you eat, it's bad for your bones. That is totally false. And again, we looked at some of this at WashU that the higher the protein intake with resistance training, the better the bone density.
Amazing.
And you have to really think about your parents. Oftentimes it's been missed. The resistance training piece is really missed. People talk a lot about yoga, talk a lot about Pilates, and then there's meatheads who, I love. My husband's a total meathead. But there's a whole spectrum of training. And, it's really important to do resistance training, and it doesn't have to be heavy. And I cringe when I say that, but the data supports that as long as you have enough volume going to failure, and this is, out of Stu Phillips' lab in Canada. We won't hold that against him. I love Stu. But you have to get that resistance training done. There's no way around it. It's kind of like you might do something for your heart. You have to do something for this tissue, this contractile tissue.
Yeah. I think a lot of women who go to their doctors and maybe they see that they need to up their bone mineral density, they'll start taking a calcium supplement.
Yeah.
Which is there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Haven't there been a number of studies that have shown that that taking calcium supplementally actually can increase risk for heart disease?
So there is some evidence about that. I do recommend calcium in my practice. I recommend calcium, vitamin D, K2. And also in certain amounts. You can't just take a whole bolus of calcium all at once. That's not what is recommended. And right now, a lot of us are not getting enough calcium. And that is true. So there are times in which I do recommend that in a responsible way. That's really important.
Yeah. Man, protein. Yeah. It's so what then, there's like this dogma in the nutrition space to just, all things in moderation. Everything's about balance. So walk me through like a day of eating for you. Like what is a balanced, and I'm using air quotes, balanced meal look like for you?
So I don't know if I believe in the balance, and I'm just being truthful. I think that the number one thing that you have to do is you have to determine your ideal body weight. Mm-hmm. I'm 125 pounds. I'll keep that as an ideal body weight. I'll have 125 grams of protein. What's your ideal body weight?
Probably like around what I am now, give or take a few pounds, but I usually hang out at around 185 pounds.
Okay. So that's how much protein I would recommend that you have. And that would be how you build a baseline nutrition plan. Mm-hmm. After that, I think about, do you like carbohydrates or do you like fat? I personally don't eat many carbohydrates. And if you think about it, for every 100 grams of protein you eat, you generate 60 grams of carbohydrates.
For every 100 grams of protein you eat, you generate 60%?
Yeah.
Wow.
So an individual could do a largely, protein-based diet and generate all the glucose they need through gluconeogenesis. So for me, when I think about building my nutrition plan, I think about the high-quality protein. And then I think, do I want carbohydrates or do I want fat? The current recommendation is 150 grams of carbohydrates a day. That's a lot, especially if you have any kind of metabolic impairment. That's too much. You have to then think about carbohydrates in a meal-to-meal basis. And I'm really glad that you asked me this. If you want to optimize body composition, carbohydrates need to be at 40 grams or less per meal. I don't care how you get it. It's 40 grams or less per meal.
You haven't mentioned the word ketosis once.
No.
You're not, that's not the goal.
No, it's not for me because while a ketogenic style diet may be good for certain things, whether there's certain kinds of cancer, but it might be muscle sparing, but it's not muscle promoting. There are decades of literature to support optimal protein diet to protect muscle tissue and grow muscle tissue. That is my number one priority. So individuals that do a ketogenic diet, I can understand that they're dealing with, wanting to mitigate risk factors or maybe they're obese, but arguably, why not do an optimal protein diet? Truly. I mean, try it. I have implemented into thousands of patients' nutrition plan, and I've seen some detrimental effects with a ketogenic style diet. I've seen it change hormones. I've seen it increase reverse T3. I've seen it much less effective in women, and I couldn't tell you why. That's just my clinical experience, and I know there's physicians out there and people that would argue differently, but again, you have to experiment with yourself. I come from a muscle-centric view, and I think that when we focus on muscle tissue as the organ of longevity, as our number one priority, then we're talking about real root cause medicine. Fat tissue comes later. That's focused again on pathology. If we focus on pathology, we're chasing our tail. Because that's the example in medicine. In medicine, they always focus on pathology. But solution-based eating is really muscle-centric. So anyway, you asked me about carbohydrates. So you actually asked me about my nutrition.
Yeah.
40 grams or less because that diminishes the insulin response. And then fat intake is as desired. Simple.
Got it. So
4 times a day.
Okay. So how many meals a day are you eating?
3 to 4.
3 to 4?
Anywhere between 30 to 50 grams of protein. It's okay if I overshoot protein because protein is very difficult to store as fat. There's never been any negative studies. I mean, they've gone up to 3.3 grams per kilogram easily.
Wow.
And we've never seen any detrimental effects. improves satiation. It improves body turnover, right? So we're replacing 300 grams a day. Everyone focus on gut health. One of the amino acids, threonine, is so important for mucin production, for gut health. Our immune cells utilize these amino acids for health. You know, it's so under-discussed and so important.
So, like, what is a plate? Give me like your breakfast plate and your dinner plate. Like, what do those look like?
Eggs. Breakfast is eggs. We have a little infant, so it's whatever is easy. Maybe 5 eggs, whole eggs, heritage eggs, blue.
I like that.
They're amazing.
Blue shells?
Yeah, wow. blue and brown shells. Delicious.
Oh my God.
I know.
So wait, you're not also thinking like, got to get my fiber? Like, what do you?
No, I don't actually.
You don't? Interesting.
And I'm not sure what I think about this whole fiber situation. I think it really depends on the gut microbiome. But the scientists would argue with me and say, but you know what? There's good data out there that fiber clearly supports good gut health and biodiversity. That may be true, but I can tell you from my clinical experience in NF1, which is not quite important, that I don't need it. And I have a ton of patients that do well without it.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel, you know, I love to go in on the eggs first thing in the morning, but I just, you know, I feel like it's not, intuitively, I just feel like for me, it's not complete without some kind of like, you know, either I'll like slice up a tomato or like eat an avocado or, you know, something like additional. But yeah, I mean, I get that fiber, you know, there is this sort of blanket recommendation that people should just like eat more fiber. Right. But that's not going to work for every person.
It doesn't.
In fact, the minute if you abruptly try to increase your fiber dramatically, you're going to have all kinds of like digestive, you know, inconveniences. You know,
that was a very polite way of saying that.
Digestive inconveniences.
Yeah.
We've all had them, right?
But I think you bring up a really good point, in that what we're seeing now is nutrition is so much more about things that perhaps we don't have our finger on the pulse of, you know? For example, I know some vegan and vegetarian patients that thrive, and my vegan patients have almost they have very little protein. You know, I think to myself, why is that? So there is a component of biodiversity that seems to defy certain things. I mean, arguably they're going to be smaller, they're going to have less muscle mass, their bone density is going to be worse. There's all these other things, but there are going to be some studies coming out that the gut microbiome does break down to provide amino acids. It hasn't been out yet, but I do know that it is being worked on, and I do know that it will come out. So it'll just be something interesting to look at.
It's very interesting. But you're not a carnivore, right?
No, but I would say I'm much closer to, if I were to define myself, to a carnivore style diet. I'll have an avocado. I don't think carnivores eat avocado.
Well, if you're regularly engaging in super intense, you know, HIIT training or resistance training, is there a benefit to titrating up carbohydrates or?
Yeah. Well, number one, it really depends on the individual. So my husband was in the military for a really long time. Those guys that are going on long deployments, they're definitely not doing any kind of caloric restriction or carbohydrate restriction. They're carrying really heavy packs. So those guys, you know, you think for every hour of more intense exercise over 120 beats per minute, you can generate the need for the body between 30 and 70 grams of carbohydrates per hour, depending on what you're doing. I also have a lot of athletes that do not require carbohydrates, that do very well in a more protein-adapted plate. You know, just as we were talking before, that for every 100 grams of protein that you ingest, you generate 60 grams of carbohydrates. So through gluconeogenesis, it's your body generating the carbohydrates. You don't actually have to ingest it. So it really depends on the athletic performance. It depends on the athlete. So it's not necessary.
Yeah. I'll just throw my own anecdote into the mix.
He was doing clubs before we got here.
I was, yeah. I actually don't know what I'm doing with the clubs, but I have some. But I've been boxing lately. I've been taking private boxing lessons, which is a very intense workout. And there's a number of confounding variables. Some days I do it in LA and it's just super hot out. Some days it's not as hot out. But what I've noticed is that if I do it fasted in the morning, and you know, I I actually typically love to have fasted workouts, but with boxing in particular, because it's such a specific kind of exercise, you know, high intensity anaerobic exercise, I find that if I do it fasted, I just bonk a lot quicker than on days when I eat like a banana beforehand. And I don't typically, you know, this is sort of like a new thing for me because I never in the past felt the need for carbohydrates before a workout. So I don't know. I'm just sort of like experimenting and seeing what works best. Cause you know, some days it just gets really hot and there's like, as I mentioned, there's all these different variables, but yeah, sometimes I find like I do perform better, more effortlessly when I have some of that carbohydrate to go around.
And you wouldn't be alone in saying that. I would also be interested to see how you did on creatine, 5 grams of creatine. Yeah. As well as perhaps, you know, electrolytes throughout the workout and branched chain amino acids. It would just be interesting to see how you do and if there's any anecdotal improvement.
Yeah. BCAAs, talk to me about those because those are, you know, people, you see them all the time in the fitness community. How do those compare to just eating whole protein?
Well, and Bob Wolf came out with a great paper on this particular thing. And it was pretty controversial. And he's in Galveston, Texas. So here's what I think about branched chain amino acids. There's a place for them, but there's 20 amino acids. In order to have muscle protein synthesis, which is really what everyone is looking for when they're thinking about branched chain, is you need the whole spectrum. So what would happen if you took BCAAs on an empty stomach for your muscle, for muscle protein synthesis? Nothing. Nothing. It would be like turning a key to a car and trying to start the car without any gas. But here's where it actually is exceptional. For your listeners who are vegetarian or vegan or who say, you know what, I don't really want to eat a higher protein diet, you put in a scoop of branched chain amino acids, and then this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You increase that leucine amount. Now you're talking about augmenting the proper meal. That is where they're exceptional. So branched chain amino acids in, say, for example, if you're having 2 or 3 ounces of fish, or maybe you're having your 5 cups of quinoa, you throw that branched chain amino acid in and your muscle views it as a protein bolus and you have the rest of the amino acids to help.
Wait, what? Fish, though, is a great protein source, no?
Yeah. So fish has about 5 grams of protein per 1 ounce. So you would need 6 ounces of salmon. You're a bigger dude, that would be no problem. I could never eat that much.
Interesting.
I could maybe eat 4 ounces, which would give me 20 grams of protein. But if I told you the most important thing that you can do is protect muscle at all costs, and as we age, the tissue becomes more anabolically resistant, then the thing that I have to do to protect my tissue is to make sure I'm getting 2.5 grams of leucine per meal.
This is so surprising. So fish has a lower protein density than chicken and beef? Wow.
And because it's not gravity bearing. So again, you pointed out so astutely that like fuels like. I mean, unless you're scaly and slimy, which I don't know anyone who is.
No, I know some people that are.
But so it actually has a different protein density.
Wow, because they're not gravity. So
exactly. It's not a gravity bearing. You know, but then someone would say, well, what about an egg? Well, but an egg is kind of the precursor to the chicken. But if it swims, it just has a lower protein density.
Fish are just not swole.
They're not. No,
they're not.
No, that would be weird.
Wow. The best thing that you can do to really free yourself from the confusion and the corporate interest is to just do what's going to be best for your own health.
Yeah. And like you said, these are very complex topics. The idea that someone could eat meat and make the environment better, that someone could go vegan and make the environment better. These are very divergent topics, and there's probably ways in which a better answer exists, which is essentially all coming together, trying to figure out a plan. But what I'm seeing happening is people are becoming very distracted. Yeah. The fighting is actually distracting from the goal of overall health and wellness.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, like, we think about how dramatically we've had to scale up food production just over the past 100 years.
Not to mention red meat consumption is down something like 70%.
It is down. Yeah. Chicken consumption is up.
Or maybe it's,
No, red meat is down. No,
but I don't know the percentage. Since 1975, I'm pretty sure it is down. Yeah. Maybe it's not as much as 70%, but it's.
We are eating less red meat, but I mean, the point is we've had to scale up our food production so vastly over the past 100 years, and mistakes have been made, but that doesn't mean that we have to opt out of the system entirely. No, we make the system better by voting with our wallet for the producers who care and who are trying to do things better and who are pushing the industry forward.
Yeah.
In terms of sustainable practices, better growing methods, regenerative agriculture, et cetera.
All things that are incredibly beneficial.
Yeah. So what goes through your head like when you see some of these like highly credentialed people, medical doctors, longevity scientists, promoting this notion that, you know, we're going to live longer on less protein?
I actually really, really struggle with it. I struggle with it because if you just look at the science, first of all, let's define longevity. Are we talking about living from age 95 to 96? Are we talking about 95 to 98? Are we talking about 6 months to a year? What are we talking about? How do we define longevity, first and foremost?
Right.
What about the life at the end, right? Which I am an expert. I mean, I don't want to call myself an expert. I'm trained in it.
Yeah.
I would consider that much more advanced knowledge than, say, the average physician dealing with end of life as a geriatrician. You want to be as strong as you can, hands down, going towards the end of life. You do not want to be 98 and bedridden. You want to be 98 and strong. And if that means that you reduce your life by 6 months, okay. But have you seen the end result if you decide to reduce your protein intake? The RDA is set at 0.8 grams per kilogram.
Right.
That is, the longevity experts are recommending half that.
Oh my God.
The way that the RDA is set is it's just disease prevention.
Right.
So now you're going to reduce it by 50% of that. That's irresponsible. And that's not scientifically sound. And that's dangerous.
And it's not proven.
But you're talking about 30 years of scientific evidence to support protein intake, sarcopenia, and muscle mass to help with aging. This is not new stuff. This is what we're coming up against is maybe someone is selling their longevity thing or the best interest is not the best interest of the people.
Right.
And that's really what I'm here to fight for, because I'm telling you, the end of life is not easy.
No, and it becomes incredibly difficult to maintain muscle as we get older. And
now we're going to further reduce our protein intake. The one thing that is actually going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis that is required for muscle mass, you require stimulus, you require calories, and you require protein.
And protein isn't just important for muscle mass retention, right? It's important for bone strength.
Everything. Bone health.
Bone health.
It's important for everything. Immune system, hormones, skin, you name it. Gut turnover.
And also, like, what is in the minds of these scientists that are promoting this idea? Like, do they think that we're just going to be removing protein from our diets and then adding more like organic, like salads to replace that protein with? No, we live in the Western world, in the modern standard American food environment, right?
And yes, and why don't we just talk about that? Why don't we talk about this hormone consumption? People say, well, there's so many hormones in beef. So there's about, I don't know, 7 nanograms of estrogen in a 4-ounce beef patty. There's about 80 in an egg. There's about 1 million in a soy burger.
Wow.
So this has become so convoluted for people. And I just feel as if, as consumers, if we open our eyes, if we say, okay, well, wait, I know that I'm being told this, but does this actually make sense? Then people would say, no, oh my gosh, this makes no sense.
Makes no sense. I think the only reasonable argument is that, well, I think there are 1.5 reasonable arguments to be made. One is that you don't like eating flesh.
Totally.
That's a totally reasonable argument. You don't like it.
Which is, the idea of it sounds gross.
Yeah.
I get it.
If you don't like it, I'm not going to try to convince you to like it if you don't like it. And 2, I think that there's the ethical argument. But I think even that argument, even people that adopt a vegan diet for ethical reasons are not fully aware of the breadth of how plant production can affect local and global ecosystems.
Absolutely.
So, have we just decided that the value of countless, the value of the lives of countless fish, birds, squirrels, rabbits is somehow less worthy than the value of one cow? for example.
Totally. And, on that same note, we probably shouldn't be driving either, because driving kills 30,000 deer a year.
There you go.
Probably shouldn't drive either.
Yeah. I mean, so there are all these nuances that people don't think about.
Right. And we make it very binary.
We make it very binary.
And it's not.
Yeah. So getting back to protein, what about protein timing? This is a question that comes up all the time.
This is a question that comes up, and it is very clear for an aging individual, and arguably we're all aging, that when the muscle is primed, for example, you came in this morning and you had just trained, your timing protein right after that would be very beneficial. Now, people are going to argue and say, well, it's not necessarily beneficial for a young, healthy guy. And I would say, okay, I get that, but it's a great habit to get into. And as we age, or if an individual is more overweight, there's something called anabolic resistance. And this is a decrease in efficiency of the muscle to recognize and utilize protein, which that threshold goes down when the muscle is primed. So essentially, you could get away with less protein right after you train, which will have the same impact as it would on a young muscle. So for example, we know that you need, when you're young, you can stimulate muscle protein synthesis with leucine, which you said is an amino acid, an essential amino acid, probably at much lower doses than the recommended 2.5. So let's say you train, you get 20 grams of protein, and you'll get an anabolic response. As you age, that anabolic response, which then subsequently relates to muscle protein synthesis, goes down. So after you eat or after you train, feeding with protein is a prime time to do it.
Wow.
Because now your muscle responds, your older muscle would respond like a younger muscle.
Interesting. So you're basically like, exercise is in a way like a fountain of youth for your musculature.
Yes.
And your body.
Yes, especially because it's an endocrine organ system.
It's an endocrine organ system. So what are the kinds of proteins? Is there any type of protein that would be perhaps most beneficial in the post-workout window?
I think whey protein is fantastic. Whey protein is a food matrix. It has alpha-lactalbumin. It has all kinds of food matrix qualities, and it has a great amino acid profile. And it's quick to absorb. One of the things is you can't sip your protein shake. You have to drive the amino acids in the blood up.
You said that last time. Can you, okay, so,
yeah.
So unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah.
You don't want to sip your protein shake slowly. You want to slam it.
You want to slam it.
Why is that, Dr. Lyon?
Well, because, and I was just thinking about all the funny things that I could say, but the mom jokes are just rough. The thing with muscle protein synthesis and the thing with dietary protein is that you have to get a bolus amount. And it's really from this target in the muscle, this mTOR, which is mechanistic target of rapamycin. You have to stimulate it, and it either happens or it doesn't. It's kind of like being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You need to actually get a high enough threshold so it turns on the process.
Got it.
And that process would be roughly to start 30 grams of protein. If you are sub-threshold, nothing happens. You don't actually kick off that. And I know I said you could get away with 20 grams of protein post-workout. It does vary a bit depending on age, but an overall number would be really getting between 30 up to 50 grams of protein to actually reach the blood level of leucine at one time. So let's say you sip your protein shake and you never quite get to that 2.5 grams of leucine.
Got it, because it's so rapidly digested that you're digesting it as being cleared. Is that sort of like? Well,
yeah, you sip it and then, yes. So you sip it, it's in your bloodstream, and then it goes away.
Got it.
But you need to actually hit that threshold.
And what is it, 2.5 grams?
Yeah, 2.5 grams of leucine. Don't supplement with leucine alone, because that's like starting a car. You need all the amino acids, which is why whey protein is so great. Or if you want to use your vegan protein, then you could use 1 scoop of branched chain amino acids.
Got it.
But you cannot sip your protein shake. So if you see someone in the gym, you're like, that guy. Get over there.
Yeah. Interesting. So,
which is one of the biggest mistakes for, fat loss and hunger control, is that people, are really looking to change their body composition. There's a more effective and efficient way to do that is really by bolusing protein. And I know that there is some controversy about this, that maybe perhaps it's about a 24-hour period, but I don't think that that's true. I think that you can really utilize exercise and then that post-workout window.
What do you mean by bolusing protein?
Having it all at one time.
Having it all at one time.
Yeah.
Got it. So 20 grams of whey protein, because if I recall correctly, so I don't know if I have my figures exactly right, but that's you're well over 2.5 grams of leucine with a 20-gram whey serving.
Right.
If you were going to go for a plant-based protein powder, again, if I recall correctly, 20 grams of whey of a plant-based protein powder, you're under 2.5 grams. So
exactly. Very smart. So you might need 40 grams.
40 grams of like a
You might need double the calories. And maybe not double. It would depend on what kind.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need more.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. And then when it comes to like protein distribution throughout the day, a lot of people are really interested these days in intermittent fasting. We talk about how there are perhaps some cardiometabolic benefits of, constraining one's feeding window to like an 8-hour, 10-hour, maybe 12-hour period per day, in contrast to the 16 hours a day that your average American is eating. Is that sufficient in terms of protein consumption if you're just eating your protein over a span of 8 hours a day, or are you of the position that maybe it should be spread sort of more broadly?
I think time restricted feeding can be great. It allows for calorie control. It allows for gut rest, and it also allows for the feeding to be consistent. I don't want to say circadian entrainment, but it allows for, feeding and then stopping. Now, I often talk about 30 grams of protein for body composition. There's a couple reasons as to why that is. If people want to lose weight, they have to keep their calories under control. You do. By hitting a 3-meal a day, 30 grams of protein, you're hitting the minimum amount. You have to understand where someone is. So if someone really has no control over their hunger, then you want to get them to be able to gain control of their hunger and gain control of their blood glucose. The way to do this is every 4 to 5 hours, 30 grams of protein with a carbohydrate meal of 40 grams or less if they eat carbohydrates and they're not training. So that allows to mitigate an insulin response, and now you're balancing blood sugar.
40 grams or less, is that like a magic number?
It is, because you'll get a more robust insulin response. And listen, the number could be 40 or 50, but really anything above that will cause a more robust insulin response. And if you want to lose weight, people will argue that it is calories in, calories out, which I believe, but I also believe that insulin can have negative effects. It can drop your blood sugar. There's all kinds of things that it can do.
I agree. I think there's got to be an obesity model that reconciles, both the calorie-centric energy balance model, which is obviously true, with the insulin obesity model.
I actually would agree with you. And I talk to my mentor about this very conversation all the time. And he also agrees.
Yeah, interesting. It's sort of like politics, right? It's like you're either one or the other. And there's just no viable in-between party, right?
Right.
For those of us that are like neither really, that don't fit neatly into either camp. Well, what about the obesity models?
I agree.
It's similar.
I agree. So starting the day with protein, and then we know that that has effects on gut hormones and it can help with satiation. But you can easily use that for weight loss in a time-restricted feeding window. Now, if someone cares about optimizing for muscle mass or preventing sarcopenia, now you're talking about the first meal of the day should be easily above that 30 grams. Could be 50. Your body is catabolic. The first meal of the day, your muscle is primed for muscle protein synthesis. Now, that process is energetically expensive for stimulating tissue. The next meal could be a smaller protein meal. And then that last meal should be another larger protein meal, 40, 50 grams of protein.
So how many grams of protein are you trying to get on a 24-hour period?
You could go as high as 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. You could go a little bit lower. It depends on what the person, chooses.
Yeah.
Ideally, they say, oh, well, as long as you're getting 1 gram per pound lean body mass. But I don't think, do you know your lean body mass?
I use I'm.
It's a trick question.
I don't know my exact.
I don't know mine.
Well, I can estimate it, but I don't know it.
We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much my liver weighs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point.
So lean body mass includes everything. Blood, brain, all the organs, everything.
Yeah.
I think a much easier way to do it is what is your ideal body weight? If I'm 115, then I will consume 115 grams of protein. And then whatever I want for carbohydrates and fat, as long as I am underneath that 40 to 50 grams, or, for women, maybe 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates, why even push the threshold? And then fat is tolerated depending on what their calorie intake is.
See, I find that 1 gram per pound of body weight is just, it's hard to get to.
It is.
Like I'm 185, 100. I kind of oscillate between 185, 190. And that's a lot of protein to get.
It is a lot.
I mean, on a daily basis.
Because of your appetite?
Well, for one, protein is highly satiating. We know that. So it's like, there's that. And I do feel like I eat a lot of protein, and I probably get 0.7 grams per pound of my body weight, roughly. That's like 130 something.
Okay.
Like I feel like that's probably generally what I get. If I had to get like an additional 50 grams on top of that, I mean, I'm not going to be able to do that.
0.7 grams per pound is totally adequate.
Okay.
That's great.
What's the RDA? The RDA is
grams
like
per kilogram.
Per kilogram. It's like half.
2.2 kilograms to 1 pound.
Wow. So
you're almost double the RDA.
Yeah. Yeah. The RDA would be like 0.35 grams per pound of body weight, which would be like, I can't even imagine. I would just feel like I'd be consuming too much energy. Like just.
You would. The average female eats 70 grams of protein a day. The average male intakes 90 grams a day.
Wow. So there's like.
And then 300 grams of carbohydrates.
Right. Carbs through the roof.
But we're still focused on fat and losing fat. And then there's this epic cycle of yo-yo dieting where people then destroy more skeletal muscle. And it's super predictable.
Right.
Which ultimately we need to change. We need to change the face of medicine.
We do. Protein before bed.
It's just another meal.
Just another meal.
It's just another meal.
There is some research though. I mean, because you're fasting for a very long time overnight, that if you really are trying to maximize anabolism, right? Don't you want to get some? I mean, don't bodybuilders wake up in the middle of the night?
That's crazy. You don't have to do that, right? That's unnecessary.
Good. Thank God. There's probably also value in backloading.
There is. So I would say that's when I use carbohydrates the most, is later on in the day.
Interesting.
The first meal of the day is most important. I don't care when you have it. If you have it at noon, that's fine. But this sets up you for metabolic flexibility. It is, you get that first meal right. You're not chasing blood sugar. You're not chasing insulin. You're not chasing, drop in blood sugar, and then your heart's racing because you're having to generate glucose and cortisol. So I would say that the first meal of the day, you keep low carbohydrate. And that you place your carbs, if you're going to have them, around exercise, or simply you backload your carbohydrates to the meal before bed. I have seen that really help with deep sleep.
Wow, interesting.
So these are just practical tips for people to really understand. But I'm telling you, if they take away nothing else, they have to understand that protein matters in a 24-hour period, in a proper distribution. So really, it could be 4 to 5 hours. That's really when you're thinking about that mTOR, that reset. And then getting protein in the right amounts. So there's a lot of talk about the ketogenic space and the low carb space, but nobody's talking about dosing protein correctly. And it's no wonder that we have all these subsequent health effects, even if someone is low carb, because no one's addressed muscle tissue.
So every 3 to 4 hours.
4 to 5.
Every 4 to 5 hours.
I would say 4 to 5 hours because it allows that. It allows for that mechanism in the muscle cell to reset, which is really important because when I think about feeding, I think about two things. Are you eating to remove hunger? So that's one thing, so I'm just going to have a snack that's maybe under 250 calories, or am I eating for a metabolic purpose? And when you're eating for a metabolic purpose, the concept is really spreading those meals so that you're getting that full anabolic response.
I love that. 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight.
Yep. Ideal body weight.
Ideal body weight.
Yeah.
What are your views on protein shakes? And then second part of that question, what's your view on collagen?
Great question. Protein shakes can be very valuable. They have to be drank. They have to be taken at one time.
At one time.
So you cannot sip it. Because if you sip it, you are then sub-threshold of that amino acid content. And this is the number one thing that I see people do. They'll say, I'm going to have this protein shake, and they'll sip it over an hour.
I don't understand. So you're saying if you're going to do a protein shake, you've got to slam it?
Well,
drink it really...
Eat it within a half an hour, the whole thing.
Interesting.
Drink it. Don't eat it. That would be weird. Unless you're microwaving it, or I don't know.
You can make like an ice cream with protein shake. Yeah.
Maybe. But one time.
Interesting.
As you push that out, remember the goal for muscle health is to get the bolus amount of amino acids in the bloodstream at once. Anything below that, you're just getting calories. And yeah, the amino acids do other things. They help with vasodilation and they do all that stuff. But the body cares about maintaining muscle tissue and just tissue turnover. So if you don't get enough protein, then the body is just going to go for short-term survival. So that's what I think about protein shakes. And
like types of protein that you prefer, like is it whey?
So I like whey.
Egg. Okay.
I think whey is great because if you're going to have egg, just eat the egg. Whey has a great amino acid profile. I do utilize the rice pea blend for people that are sensitive, but I'm not a super fan because we don't know what those long-term effects are. It's with pea, right? We have no idea. It has estrogen activity. We have no idea. So I would say a great whey is fantastic. And then you asked me about collagen.
Wait, before you, sorry. Yeah. So whey and then
rice pea blends.
Is there, because whey, one thing that I've always known about whey is that it digests very fast.
But that's what you need.
That's what you need. So there's no problem with consuming whey in the middle of the day. Like it's not just a post-workout tool.
No. In fact, when I did geriatrics, that was something that we always recommended.
Whey protein.
But, I will say that, and I will say that, I failed to mention this earlier, that when you exercise, your muscles are primed.
Right.
So essentially you're getting more nutrient delivery. So you could actually, and I don't want to confuse anyone, but you could get away with less protein.
In the post-workout window?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But we're not going to recommend anyone do that, but it is a possibility.
Yeah. All right. So whey it is. Collagen.
Okay. Collagen is an incomplete protein. First of all, I love collagen and I dose it pretty high in my practice, but not for a protein content. It has glycine, hydroxyproline. It has other higher levels of amino acids, but it's completely devoid of tryptophan and very low in branched chains. In fact, it's not considered a complete protein. It doesn't mean it doesn't have some effect. And I don't think that anyone knows the mechanism of action, which is interesting. And I've read quite a bit about this. It can stimulate growth factors. It's also great for hair, skin, and nails, which arguably if you try it, anyone would say that's true, especially, I dose it at 2 scoops twice a day. But when you're looking at total caloric intake, you shouldn't even count it towards your protein.
Got it. So absolutely don't count the grams of collagen that you consume towards your 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight.
No, but you can count it towards calories. And there are some great benefits of collagen. Again, I use it all the time.
Use it all the time?
I do.
Hair, skin, nails, glycine, just for...
Anxiety, helps with sleep.
Are you a believer in terms of glycine's capacity to boost metabolic health and for its longevity benefits and things like that? Chris Masterjohn talks a lot about that.
I think it's a possibility. I think that we don't have a lot of good human trials. And when I think about branched chain or when I think about amino acids in particular, there's that whole methionine restriction story. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of methionine restriction. It's one of the amino acids, and they use it in the fasting mimicking diet. They say you should restrict methionine, but all the studies are done in rats. And rats have a different methionine need. So there are just a lot of things that we need to think about. Is there good evidence for this? And I can't say... I think that in theory it could be amazing, but I just don't think we know enough.
We don't know enough.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. I use collagen as well.
How many scoops do you do?
I do 1 to 2, and I use it when I can sneak it into things that I'm consuming. So like soups, coffees,
perfect.
Coffee drinks, things like that, smoothies. So I'm a fan. Well, we don't have that much time left. Is there anything else that that we want to talk about that I haven't brought up? I feel like we've covered so much.
I think that people in this time right now, we have more access to information than ever before. I think because of that, we have more access to confusion, and we have narratives that are pulling at our minds and pulling at our dollars. So I think finding good scientists that you trust is paramount, and I think asking the right questions. because the answers that you get are a reflection of the questions that you ask. So I think that that's just really important to understand, because when we ask the right questions, we can protect the people we love.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So
what do you see online that most angers you, like in terms of like nutritional misinformation?
I mean, so protein is obviously the number one, and it's for a very particular reason. So I have a 17-year education, which is gross.
That's amazing.
It's gross. But
I wish I had your background.
No,
you have a badass background.
But I've seen so much death. And this is the part, and this is why it's so important for me to get my message out there. And if your viewers are inspired, that they share. I have sat at the bedside of more people than I can count at their, deathbed. And that's part of being a geriatrician, is you're there when they leave life, right? The amount of falls, the amount of injuries, the amount of hip fractures that I have seen, because the focus has always been focus on obesity, focus on this, focus on the wrong thing. We could have prevented these injuries. We could have prevented the devastating effects of Alzheimer's. I mean, not all of it, right? There's some that are genetic and some that are beyond our control, but we have the duty to analyze the data, take people with experience, and protect the people we love, because, there's a lot of argument that happens when everyone's younger. In your 40s, I'm just going, be plant-based, be this, do this. That conversation changes dramatically when you can no longer stand, when someone you love falls and breaks a hip and they're never coming home. They're going into assisted living, which is like, you don't want to need assistance in living. It will debilitate you. So by changing the paradigm from this fat-focused paradigm to the real issue, which is muscle, we can protect the people we love. We can protect each other, because there is a point in time where it's too late. And that's very powerful.
Yeah. I talk a lot about privilege and that it's this term that's thrown about today. It's almost become sort of like this weaponized thing. People use it to point fingers at one another and to create division. But I mean, you're so right that like adopting, these like vegan diets and just being so, and following the dietary advice of documentaries and things like that. Right. It's like, it really is a first world privilege, and primarily one of youth, I think. Because when you're older, when you're from another, from the third world, but other countries too, like, that are not necessarily third world. And when you're sick, none of this like bickering that we see all the time in the nutrition space like matters, At the end of the day, you want to do what's going to be right for your health. And I find that that's one of the things that motivates me, is helping people cut through the noise and get to like the truth. And that's why I'm so grateful for people like you who are like taking such a no nonsense approach about.
And I've been there. I'm not coming at it from a place where I haven't seen so much death that it makes me sick. It's not from this point of saying, oh, well, this is what I believe because I read this, or this is what I believe because of,
because I've got a supplement line or whatever. Yeah.
It completely changes your perspective when you're working in a nursing home and you're seeing what they've eaten and you're taking their history and you're seeing this stuff. And I'm seeing online all this BS and all these people, listen, I get a lot of hate. For what? I guarantee you, when you are that age, you're going to go, God, I was so dumb. And this was the advice I was giving my parents. Don't eat red meat because it's going to hurt you, or don't do that. It's the wrong advice. It's the single worst piece of advice we could ever give people. Don't eat your meat. Don't eat your protein. It's dangerous. It's deadly. So anyway, that's why I feel so passionate, because I've seen it. You tell me one other person that sat there, they would be saying the exact same thing I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. One person.
You have.
But the most important person in my life.
I can't imagine.
And that person, my mom, she was a meat abstainer. She never ever, and I'm not being hyperbolic. She never ate red meat, and she never ate eggs. She occasionally would eat chicken, but very rarely, and occasionally would eat fish, but very, very rarely. And she tried to be, she was health conscious.
Right.
Like if you were to ask her,
right,
she was somebody
right.
for whom health mattered. And she was just abiding by the guidelines and abiding by the conventional wisdom.
And this is what we're hearing.
Yeah.
And so it's our duty to protect people from themselves by hopefully opening the lines of communication for education.
Boom. I love that. So true. So true. Needs to be heard and repeated.
If you care about body composition, you have to focus on skeletal muscle, and we have to start testing it and measuring it as opposed to obesity.
Wow. What is, you mentioned interleukin 6. What is that for listeners who are unfamiliar with that term?
Yeah. So interleukin 6 is a protein. Interleukin 6 is something that's released. It's a cytokine. If it's released from the immune system, if it's released from a macrophage, versus if it's released from muscle, it's deemed a myokine.
Wow.
It's very cool. And eventually, we're going to start measuring that post-exercise. What if we measured interleukin 6 post-exercise to see the efficacy of skeletal muscle? Right now, we just look at strength. We look at VO2 max. We look at endpoints that are not necessarily bloodstream related.
It's fascinating. So muscle secretes all of these important chemicals. It's not just a mechanical, the function that it serves in the body is not purely mechanical.
It's biochemical in nature.
Wow.
And if you care about body composition, you care about keeping skeletal muscle healthy. What does skeletal muscle mass do? How does skeletal muscle help obesity? When you think about glucose disposal, that happens in skeletal muscle. That's the largest site for glucose disposal.
What is it? What do you mean by that? What is glucose disposal?
When you are eating a meal, it has to go somewhere. It's almost as if your muscle is an open suitcase. And if you don't train it and empty that suitcase, ultimately, glucose spills back into the bloodstream. Fatty acids spill back out into the bloodstream. Insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, all of those issues start in skeletal muscle first.
Fascinating.
So if we care about correcting for diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, as it relates to its metabolic components, even Alzheimer's, even the metabolic components of Alzheimer's, then you have to accept that muscle plays a role.
So the typical advice that people receive when they go to the doctor, and we all know the doctors are not trained when it comes to nutrition, and we could talk about that.
Yeah, because I don't think they should be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because in order to be good at something, you have to go through training. And in order to become an expert at something, it takes years in the arena. For me, I did medical school, residency, and fellowship. I also did, 4 years of nutrition training plus a post-bac.
Wow. So you did 4 years of nutrition training?
No, I did 4, 5, 6. I did 7 years.
Wow.
I did 7 years of professional nutrition training.
And what does your average MD get?
I mean, they probably get a course or two, but that's not why people should be going to physicians.
Right.
We shouldn't be going to physicians for lifestyle or nutrition advice. You go to a physician because you are looking for disease management, right? You're looking to mitigate some of these other things. You're looking at biomarkers that need to be tracked.
I agree with that. They've got too much on their plate as it is. And their schooling is like driving most physicians to the brink of depression.
I told you before, I was like, I'm ready to quit. I've tried to quit twice. It's exhausting. But you have to understand that in order for a physician to be well-trained, you want them to focus on their specialty.
But I think that's also why when most people go to the doctor and they do present with excess adipose tissue, overweight, obesity, they get this cookie cutter advice that fails time and time again, right? Eat less, move more.
That's right. But if we then decide that there is an additional specialty, that there is an incorporation between the physician and the nutrition science, that's where the magic is going to happen. Whether it is a physician that's trained in both, or whether it is a nutrition expert that is on the team that is highly, highly trained. I think that that's where the real movement comes in. But it's important. But I do think that we should stop this narrative of, well, my physician knows nothing about nutrition. You're right. Your physician should be very good at medication management. They should be very good at blood work. They should be very good at a number of other things. But in order for them to be able to look at the data in nutrition, which has now become a very emotional thing.
Yeah.
Right? In order for them to be able to look at the data in nutrition, that takes training.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So then what is the alternate? What's the alternate advice then that you think that people should be given? Generally, I mean, obviously every patient's going to be different. There's no, I'm sure that you agree there's not going to be a one size fits all approach.
Never.
But then, so what is the alternative?
I think that we, as a medical kind of society, right, or as a health-based society, we have to have some foundations that are put into place. And I think that if we have more transparency, for example, there's no question that I believe in high protein. There's a reason why I believe in high protein, and it's not because I care about the actual protein. I care about body composition. I care about mitigating obesity in a very effective way. I care about people aging well. I care about sarcopenia, which people say is a disease of aging. I am telling you, it's not a disease of aging. This is a disease, and sarcopenia is low muscle mass and strength.
Wow.
That can start in your 30s.
I'm sure it's common too.
It is common, but we don't test for it. We might test body fat using a DEXA, and then we can extrapolate for lean body mass. But we have to focus on skeletal muscle. And the way we focus on skeletal muscle is we have to optimize for protein. The way that we optimize for protein, and listen, if you care about losing weight, then dietary protein makes sense. It has a cost associated with it. There's that thermic effect of feeding, thermic effect of food. So it takes more energy to actually utilize protein than it would something else like fat or carbohydrates. That's a no-brainer. And you have to train. This is a myth. The myth is the more muscle mass you have, the more you burn. That's actually a myth.
Is it?
Yeah.
But the more muscle mass you have, the more, isn't it true that the more calories you burn with more muscle mass?
At rest? No.
Huh.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Because I like to challenge the thinking, the reiteration of things that we see.
That's why I love you.
We have to. Resting muscle mass accounts for about 20% of basal metabolic rate.
Interesting. So it's really not, the vast majority of your resting metabolic rate is probably what? Just the maintenance of your vital organs, your brain?
Yeah, other stuff. And muscle plays a role. But if you added 10 pounds of muscle, you might change your caloric need by 60 calories.
Wow. So it's like, it does affect it, but it's a small and ultimately insignificant amount.
Where the real magic happens is through training, is through exercise. Exercise, we know, helps with overall health and wellness. It helps with maintaining skeletal muscle mass, which we know if you want to survive long-term from anything. If you want to be mobile, if you want to have better blood sugar regulation, if you want to have more energy, then you want to have more muscle mass.
So let's start with training and then we'll go into nutrition, but from a training standpoint,
and there are better experts when it comes to training. That is very highly individual depending on your level of training, right? So we had Kara here before, Kara Killian, she's a beast. And for a trained individual, they have to continue to maintain that training. It takes much more effort for them to actually put on muscle versus someone like me who just had 2 babies. I will get a much more effect with less training. And for me, individuals start 3 to 4 days a week of resistance training. It really is about volume and adding in some aerobic activity.
I love that. I've been training for 20 something years at this point. And then I look at other people who've been training for just as long. And I feel like there's a big genetic component.
Yeah.
Like I train pretty hard and without being like obsessed and spending 3 hours a day in the gym. And I definitely prioritize protein. Like I practice what I preach. But it's, every gain that I've ever made in the gym, it's hard won. It comes from relentless repetition. It's not even sexy. It's just like showing up, doing the same thing, being consistent, doing the same thing over and over and over again. And little by little, you make these gains.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is when we age, the muscle changes. We get anabolic resistance. Our muscles become less efficient at utilizing protein, which is one of the reasons I feel so passionate about this topic of protein and muscle and really muscle-centric medicine, is because if we don't actually take action against it, the trajectory is very clear what happens. We have seen our aging parents. We have seen the kind of sarcopenic individual. That will happen.
Frailty.
Yeah, if you don't account for it and you don't do it now. People think that they can wait and do it later, but most people don't get fitter as they age. They decline.
Wow.
And it's not because they have to. It's because people might get injured or they eat the way that they did in their 20s and they don't optimize for dietary protein. It's that important. And now we're up against a narrative that is largely, get rid of high quality animal protein and focus all on plant protein. While there's nothing wrong with plant protein, that's horrible advice for aging individuals. That's horrible advice for individuals who are struggling with obesity, who may have a blunted response of efficiency to dietary protein and a training stimulus. This is not good advice.
So animal protein trumps plant protein.
It does. And I know that offends a lot of people, but again, we should be able to be in a society where if something works, that should be okay.
Yeah.
And if something doesn't work, that should also be okay. And if we don't have questions that are answered, there needs to be transparency about that.
What is the difference between animal protein and plant protein that makes animal protein superior for maintaining and growing muscle mass?
This is largely an amino acid profile answer. And this is hard, fast science, right? There are branch chain or there's 20 amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids. We eat for these amino acids. We cannot make them, allegedly, although there's some science to suggest very interesting things that are coming out regarding our gut microbiome, actually being able to scavenge for nitrogen and generate some of these amino acids.
Interesting.
It is. It's new.
Wow.
It's proof of concept right now, but eventually I think we will find that to be true, that there are individuals that are vegan and vegetarian and do well that way for a period of time because of their gut microbiome.
Fascinating. I was actually, the other day, I bought a packet of like a plant-based protein powder, and it had, the serving had, it was like 20 grams of protein. And it was one of these proteins that, when I'm looking for, when I am choosing protein powders to buy, I really like when they lay out the amino acid content of those proteins.
That's what we should do.
Yeah,
right?
Because not all protein powders do that.
And you're absolutely right. They should. It's just like looking at the back of a label.
Yeah. So I bought this packet, the single serving packet of vegan protein because I wanted to try it. I want to try the flavor. And usually I go
What was it? Cookie dough?
It was I think it was like a salted caramel or something. I'm a sucker
You're
for
a sucker for marketing.
Yeah.
You're like, this Halo food, this looks so good.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing.
Toasted marshmallow. They had me a toasted marshmallow.
I mean, who wouldn't, right?
I agree.
All those damn natural flavors, So I bought it, I brought it home, and then I compared it to my whey protein, which a serving of which has this. It had the same. It was like 20 grams of protein, and my whey protein also has the amino acid breakdown. And what I noticed was that on the plant protein, even though the protein grams were equivalent, the leucine was much higher and leucine is an amino acid, which I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
It was much higher in the whey protein. So that was a light bulb moment for me because I realized at that moment that protein isn't protein.
Right. And did you see at the bottom, there was a daily value, % daily value?
I don't know if I noticed that.
We should go back and we should look because the % daily value for the whey protein is going to be much higher.
Interesting.
And what the plant protein will come out to be will probably be about 50% of the whey protein.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the % daily value, because the recommendation is that we do need these amino acids.
Wow. And so you're actually getting, not only are you getting more bang for your buck with the whey protein because you've got more leucine in it.
Yep. All the essential amino acids. Wow. Well, really the branch chain. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine, those 3.
So is that why they say that if you do choose to consume plant protein, if you're on a vegan vegetarian diet, you can get by, you just need to consume more?
Yeah, you can. And so if people care about weight loss and obesity, then you don't want to actually consume extra calories.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So what's your go-to, what are some of your go-to proteins?
Well, I love red meat. I love bison. I love beef. I'll eat eggs.
Yeah. Why do you laugh?
Because we made that. I put up a protein of an egg post, and people were very offended by the the idea that dietary cholesterol has very little impact on blood cholesterol. I just laugh because, you know, when I think about the science, I've been in the nutrition space for 20 years. And a decade ago, nobody argued like this. It wasn't, I mean, it was not as crazy. Not only that, but they dropped the cholesterol recommendations from the dietary guidelines. You know, I laugh because I think about what I'm up against, what we are up against as we try to educate the public because of so much narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that if you're, first of all, total respect to whoever that chooses to adopt a vegan vegetarian diet.
Absolutely.
But do it, be honest and transparent. Let's all be a little bit more intellectually honest about our motivations. If you're an ethical vegan, that's great.
Right.
Right? But don't then try to, you know, there's like this scope creep, right? Like they try to like make it then about like health and make all these like claims. And I find that vegans online, especially like the more vocal zealots,
yeah,
they're very clever and they wield science as if like they know what they're talking about. And they use all these like terms that are very convincing to the average uninformed person, especially somebody who's like emotionally vulnerable, right? Because they use these like appeals to emotion and it's just
it's dangerous.
It's dangerous.
And I'll tell you why it's dangerous. And this is another reason why I spend so much time and effort, because it takes a lot of time and effort to educate and to do this. It's time away from family. It's time away from my practice. It's because I've seen the end result. You know, I trained as a geriatrician. I did a combined fellowship in nutritional science. It was nutritional science, obesity medicine, and geriatrics. At the end point of people's lives, or that point where they need to recover from illness, the one thing that separates their survivability is skeletal muscle. And if we take this emotional conversation and we limit people's high quality protein, the unintended consequences of that, it's devastating. And it's devastating in the short term because it can increase obesity. And Hanes data suggests that 70% of our diet is already plant-based.
Wow.
It's already plant-based.
Yeah.
The rest, 30%, comes from animal-based, you know, products and
fast food, probably.
I mean, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
When you tell people now to go more plant-based from an already 70% plant-based diet, what is going to be the consequences of that? It's just irresponsible. And that's where it becomes my duty. I really do feel like it's my responsibility, because there comes a point where you can't go backwards. There's, right, that window closes. And as you're aging, which we all do, you know, God willing, then the capacity for error becomes smaller.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, sources of animal protein also are sources of, I mean, it's not just protein that you're getting when you eat a piece of red meat, right? You're getting a slew of nutrients that are
zinc, iron. My kid eats what I thought a ton of red meat. She's iron deficient.
Wow. Yeah, iron, I didn't know this until recently, but iron deficiency anemia is a massive global problem.
It's a massive problem. So here we are over in the US saying, you know, oh, consume less, go more plant-based. And it's so ridiculous to me.
So ridiculous. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
The pursuit of metabolic flexibility really is the holy grail of health. If you are metabolically flexible, everything else falls into place. Conversely, if you're not metabolically flexible, it becomes more difficult to try and work your way around it by exercising your way into that system or that situation. You know, or taking medications.